Clare County Council, which is stepping up its efforts to tackle dereliction and boost housing supply, with plans to compulsorily acquire 20 long-term vacant and derelict properties across the county. The move is part of a wider strategy to bring more homes back into use and revitalise towns and villages. And to discuss what this means in practice, we're joined now by the Council's Director of Service for Housing, Alan Farrell, and Senior Executive Officer of the local authority, Carmel Greene. And Alan and Carmel, thank you for joining me on the show this morning. Alan, sounds like a significant step up in approach. Where are these properties located and what's driving this escalation now?
Good morning, Alan. Yeah, I suppose, first of all, just to say that Clare County Council have been active in the area of bringing houses back into use and addressing dereliction over the last number of years, and have been very successful in terms of assisting people to get into homes. The step up at the moment really is, I suppose, we formed a new directorate there towards the end of last year, really to get active in the area of housing supply, activating land throughout the county, not just on dereliction, but overall housing supply. But this is one of the strands where we're focusing. And I suppose in the case of the 20, it's a sign of things to come. We are continue to engage with the property owners, try to bring it back. And in fairness to Carmel and her team, they're very helpful in terms of giving advice and giving people the direction in terms of whether that's going to our planning or the grants are available. But there comes a point in time where we say, look, we have to use the powers that are there, and that's the powers of the compulsory purchase order, which we're doing at the moment.
And these properties, are they located in a handful of areas, or are they spread out disparately or throughout the county?
Yeah, they're spread out throughout the county. There's a mixture right across the county. I suppose what we're doing is really just to see the ones where we have been engaging over a period of time and where action hasn't taken place. We're now looking to go on those, but they are spread across the county. And I suppose it really is what we're looking is to see how can we bring these back into use in terms of the housing supply. But we also see many other benefits in terms of the economic revitalisation, trying to breathe life back into communities. There's also benefits in terms of the community well-being and the public safety. And I suppose really about, at the end of the day, what we really want to see is, that people get housing. We're in a crisis at the moment, and it's about trying to get people into a housing supply. And we have many right across the county. Carmel will go into a bit of detail with you. But if you look at the amount we've paid out in grants in terms of the older houses that have been brought back into use, it's phenomenal. Like, we've over 15 million paid out with 30 million in grants approved. And at the end of the day, what that means, it's a new home for a family, and it's a new people in the community.
And this intervention, Carmel, has been described as proportionate. I mean, how is the decision made as to when a property reaches that stage, and where are these properties long-term vacant? I know Alan mentioned there attempts to engage with owners. Were there attempts to engage with owners beforehand?
Absolutely, Alan. And some of these properties we maybe have been engaging with the owner for even up to 10 years or more. So it's a decision that's not taken lightly. We work as much as we can to advise and help owners, and particularly with the grant that was introduced a few years ago, where there's a real possibility of getting good support to an owner to either renovate their property, and if they're not in a position to do it, they always have the option to maybe sell it on to somebody who can avail of the grant. So absolutely, we've continued engagement with owners, and like, we're dealing with maybe 350 property derelict sites files at the moment. Not all of them will be at the stage of being on the derelict sites register. So it's any of those that may be on the derelict sites register that could come into this category. There's about 140 on the derelict sites register at the moment. But as I say, it's where engagement is not happening to actually take the property out of dereliction sufficiently.
Alan, of the 20 properties identified, most were residential. What kind of condition were these buildings typically in? Are they going to require a lot of work?
Yeah, and look, they vary, so they do. Some of them are in very poor condition, some of them are in what I get described nearly as a dangerous condition, but all of them have been deemed as in terms of being derelict, and there is legislation there, as Carmel says, we engage with people before we even put them on the derelict sites register, and then once they go on the derelict sites register, then it's a case of trying to activate it, and if that doesn't work, we go with the CPO. But they are in various conditions in terms of some very, very poor, and then just some not quite as bad. But it varies across them, and you'd really, you'd want to see the properties in question really to know the condition of them, but they do vary across the county.
Carmel, what would you say to those who would say CPOs is a heavy-handed approach?
Well, I would say we take a very reasonable approach in dealing with any property owner, and we meet with many of them. We discuss options over the phone. We guide them if something might need planning to get an agent and maybe make a planning application. We take them through the process of applying for the vacant property refurbishment grant. And I suppose in particular, Alan mentioned in the towns and villages, that grant has recently been extended to assist people in developing over the shop premises, and the grants have been increased. So it's a time, I would say, in the last few years, that type of grant aid wasn't available to owners before. So it's very significant, and we'd encourage all owners to avail of those opportunities. And it's only where that fails and there's no activation and the derelict property remains. And I suppose you asked Alan about the state of some of them. Like some have no roofs. They're absolutely awful, overgrown, broken windows, all sorts of versions of dereliction, but all that I suppose have a big impact on those living beside them and also in the town or village that they are in.
And Carmel, you have spoken of what's happening, sending a clear message to property owners. What message is that? And is it that, I suppose you've talked about the level of engagement. It sounds like, I guess you're saying every opportunity for engagement and offers of support are given to the property owners before this, I suppose, the trigger's pulled at this point.
Absolutely, Alan. We engage continually with owners. Now, there are some properties where the owner may not be clear due to legacy issues within a family, or a person may be deceased and probate hasn't been taken out. That can be the cause of dereliction in some cases. Sometimes it might be financial, but there are lots of underlying reasons. But I suppose ultimately the legislation clearly has a duty on the owner of a property to not let it be in a derelict state. So I suppose that's the premise on which we're coming at this. But ultimately the goal is to try and revitalise, refurbish that building and allow somebody to make a home or a business out of it.
And Alan, when you're talking about these particular properties, the 20 properties, but obviously there are more derelict properties around the county, is there a level of reluctance you're encountering with some owners, or are some owners just simply unable to act? They would like to address their property falling into disrepair or dereliction, but they just don't have the finances.
Yeah, and look, I suppose it varies again, Alan. Like, we do engage Carmel's team, or in I suppose even in when we stepped up this to go with the 20 properties, it wasn't a decision that was taken lightly, but it is the direction of travel that we're going. Like, we do need to make sure that we activate them. As Carmel has said there, we give them plenty of advice in terms of the grants that are available. We give them advice in terms of the planning side of the house. If there's particular issues, we'll work with them to try and help those. And there are cases where, somebody mightn't be able to take it on, but the option then is possibly set it on. And as I said, activate a new home for a couple or for a family that can move into the local area. So there's a broad range of options. And I suppose the message really we want to give is, like, Clare County Council are taking housing delivery really serious. We're doing it from the social and affordable perspective, and we're also out there. We have a new team established that are working across the county, looking at settlements to see how we can activate housing, how we can work with, whether it's with the developers or with the landowners or with communities, to try and do that. And I suppose this strand is really about, I suppose it brings a number of benefits. First of all, it's to activate the housing, and we are taking it serious. There will be more properties CPO'd over the coming years, over the coming months and year, and we will be very active in that area. We will give advice to people, but if we're not getting the dereliction addressed, we will start this process. And I suppose it's one of the tools that we have, and I suppose we very much use the carrot in terms of trying to help people, trying to give them the advice around the grants that are available, making sure they understand from a planning perspective and all that. But when that doesn't work, we do have to push it on. And I suppose the message is, in a crisis, we can't wait, and we have to take steps like this. But as I said, it's one of the many tools or levers that we're using right across the county to ensure that people can get into homes. Like, we're conscious of the crisis that's there. It's very difficult. People are stuck living at home. Other people just can't access it. We have people in homeless accommodation. So it's really time to force every lever that we can to try and get the result of activating housing and getting people into homes and building communities.
And Carmel, Alan's just said there will be more properties CPO'd in the coming months and going forward from there. I mean, have you a sense of how many homes could potentially be brought back into use through the CPO route?
Look, I would say we have done maybe about 30 compulsory acquisitions under the Derelict Sites Act over the last 2 to 3 years. I would say that there are quite a number that will be progressed this year unless we have some real traction on the ground, really. Like people have to go through various processes and financials as part of it, doing a grant application, getting planning. But it's the ones that there isn't that capacity to, I suppose, for the owner to bring that forward. We then have to look at the last resort option.
And in terms of once these properties are CPO'd and how quickly they can realistically be turned into housing. I mean, you mentioned earlier some of them are pretty poor. Some of them don't even have roofs. So that's going to, I guess, lengthen the time frame as to when they could be turned into housing. And then are there other potential stumbling blocks, Carmel, legal or logistical challenges? What happens if a property owner contests a CPO?
Yeah, so if a property owner, I suppose, objects to the CPO of their property, there is a right of appeal, and that goes to what was in Burklanola now, Commission Planola, and they will make an independent assessment of it and decide to, I suppose, grant the CPO or refuse it. So that takes maybe up to 6 months of a process. Those that aren't objected to, we go through a process called a vesting process. We lodge the papers in the land registry and we await the outcome of that. So then the potential of the property is either to look at it maybe for social housing or to put it on the open market with conditions that the new owner will have to refurbish it within a period of time. So it's about turning around the property. It's not just a case of buying it to leave it there.
Okay, and Alan, we know this is, I guess, every little bit helps in terms of addressing the housing crisis. We're talking about these CPOs of these 20 derelict properties. We know there are plans to amend the county development plan as well. How important is all of this in tackling in terms of the bigger picture of solving the housing shortage? And do you think ultimately, I suppose maybe more medium to long term, given how much time it might take to turn some of these properties around, how effective do you think it'll be in addressing the housing shortage in Clare?
Yeah, and look, as I said, there's a number of levers here. This is one of them, and really, it's about trying to get those into housing, but it's also to address the blight that is on our county in terms of the dereliction. The county development plan is another one where we're zoning quite a number of or quite a large area of lands in terms of housing. The other side of that is that and I mentioned the housing activation team. We are engaging with developers, with landowners, and we had a new member of our team that joined us there a number of months ago. And her and the rural development officers are out meeting the local councillors, meeting at local municipal district level, and getting down to the level of detail where there's land zoned and trying to identify why it hasn't moved on. So we're working quite actively too with the CIF in terms of their members and trying to get the message out there. Look, Clare County Council is open for business. Clare County Council wants to address the housing crisis. And really, even in terms of the dereliction, it is a cross-council or cross-directorate approach. We are working very closely with our colleagues in planning. We're working closely. Housing comes within my own directorate. We have taken a number of derelict sites that Carmel have been working on for the last number of years and turned them into homes. So it's one of many levers. And there are other issues such as infrastructure, and again we're working closely with the Housing Activation Office at national level to ensure where we can push on infrastructure. I think one of the real positives from the housing activation offices that they have secondees from all the utility companies, from the likes of Ishcare and ESBN. They've got secondees from the National Transport Authority and from local authorities. So they're working at national level to try and see where there's issues that can be addressed. They are investing. They launched a fund there for 1 billion earlier this year to look at infrastructure. And again, Clare County Council have made a number of proposals in that area. We are looking at where we can secure land ourselves, where we will deliver on either directly or work in partnership with the private sector. So there's a whole host of options, Alan, that we're really looking at, and this will be one of the ones that we think. And I said, for me, I've seen the houses that Carmel has been dealing with, and where people have got grants, and when you see them beforehand and you see what actually turns out in terms of the houses are absolutely beautiful. But as I said, what's more important is that there's actually people have a home where they can live and they can become part of a community.
Okay, an interesting development. We do have to leave it there, but my thanks to both of you for joining us on this. That's Alan Farrell there, the Council's Director of Service for Housing, and also the Local Authority Senior Executive Officer at Carmel Greene. Alan and Carmel, thank you for being with me.